righty. So we are into our third week, and there's a couple, oh, excuse me. I wanted to make a couple clarifications, um, and just talk to a couple, mention a couple things that I hope people don't get upset or anything about. Uh, each week's reflection should be on that week's material. This is kind of important. I don't know which of you or if any of you were in my contemporary art class last year. Um, there were a couple people who just did not understand that the weekly reflection needed to be on that week's material, and they were doing their own thing. I don't want anybody to get upset or anything like that. Sometimes people will turn in things for the wrong week. And I think that the confusion comes from the fact that the projects can be on any of the module titles that you see. As long as the project deals squarely with the material that we are covering in the scope of this class, and as long as you can tie it into one of those module titles, that's totally fine. But the weekly reflections need to be on something that you found during that week. Now, one person sent something in for another class that was outside of the scope of the class, but it was something that I told them, no, it doesn't count. And they said, but this is material that you mentioned in, while we were talking about it. And it's even written in the course material. And of course they were right. So they got the credit for it. But for example, like this week, we're talking about Etruscans, Greeks, and Romans. And so if you turn in a weekly reflection about Mississippian culture, it's not going to work. And if you are turning in something from this week for a previous week's reflection, all you've got to do is just resubmit it under the right week. Hold on to it until we get to that week. So, and it doesn't bother me at all. And I think several people have already had an experience with they didn't get perfect points, and it was because I'm just double checking. I am recording it. Excellent. Because they've missed like an accessed on phrase, or the citations were out of sequence, or they didn't include a photo of the material that they were discussing. If at any point you're missing points, feel free to resubmit. Or on the other side of that, let me know. I don't think that point spread is fair because I did do this. And if you guys talk to me, I'm more than happy to at least listen. Sometimes I don't really care and I won't do anything about it, but at least more than 30% of the time I will, pretend to listen, which, is better than being completely ignored. Anybody do anything fun over the holiday on Monday? I love the irony of naming a lazy day and as a chance to celebrate working hard. I think that's just a beautiful thing. All righty. Today, I have a couple things to talk about. If at any point you guys need to ask questions, please do. And if I'm sharing my screen, I can't see what anybody raising their hand or anything like that. So feel free to unmute yourself and say, pardon me. And if I don't acknowledge the page two people, is anybody here in marketing at all? You know where the safest place to bury a body is? Page 2 of Google, because nobody will ever see it. But so Ryan, Ben, and Mark, I'm apologizing now if I don't get to you guys, because on my screen you're showing up as page 2 people. And all I can say is I'm sorry. Let's see if I can change the visibility though.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Mark.
Fantastic.
Because I had done something where I could see. Oh, that's not going to do anything. I could see everybody at once, but I don't know how to get back to that. Oh, wait a sec. I accidentally found it. Okay, great. Yeah, this is the beauty of technology, where you can accidentally back into doing the right thing. If only social morality worked as easily. Okay. I work very hard, and this is being recorded, so I will watch the language that I use. I work very hard to prevent anybody from knowing what my actual political views are. And so if I make fun of somebody, I will try to make fun of everybody. And conversely, if I'm respectful of somebody, I will try to be respectful of everybody. But the making fun of happens a lot more often than the being respectful. So I'm sorry ahead of time. If you're offended by the things I say, I will try equally as hard to offend absolutely everybody so you don't feel left out. All right. I want to show you something that I did, and I hope that people saw it. Okay. I updated the research and discovery project's guidelines. Every research and discovery project assignment has these guidelines associated with it. And you'll see here, I tried to find about 8 or 10. I think I ended up, it's at 10. These are all websites that help with putting together your MLA style or format citation. And each of them, well, they're designed to be, I picked them because they had a free access, but they do work with varying success. And an example I'll give is when you are doing a citation, the citation should have the name of the author, failing that, the name of the publication, failing that, the name of the title of the article as the first thing. And some of the citations work a little bit better. Citation machines work a little bit better than others. Some of them don't pay any attention to the information that they're given. They just automatically categorize stuff. So when you do your citation, look at them and see if it makes sense. And one of the reasons why I point that out is sometimes an article, like a website, will have a number on it. Unless the number, you can attach that to the name of the article, or that's the actual author's name, which doesn't happen very often, or it's the publication name. The number should not be the first thing in the citation. Sometimes a number will be associated with the gallery, and that's fine too. But sometimes also the articles will, or the citation engine will manufacture a citation using it as an identifier as part of the person's name. And this becomes frustrating when it's like Albrecht Dürer, comma, German, or Dr. Hans Schlemel, or something like that. The doctor should not be alphabetized as part of the name, and the identifier, like Albrecht Dürer German, should not be part of the alphabetization of the name. In that case, if the author is, say, Dr. Albert Frost, then you would alphabetize it by saying Frost, comma, Dr. Albert, because the doctor mitigates the first name. If the citation says Albrecht Dürer, comma, German, the proper way to cite that would be Dürer, comma, Albrecht, and you don't even need to put the German in. That was used by somebody who's putting together museum tags. Does that kind of thing make sense? And if that shows up, I'll dock you like a point and point out this is where it needs to be changed, and it's not a big deal. Most of the time, I don't care. Sometimes it just kind of annoys me, and it's not your fault. It's just the citation engine the machines do that occasionally. So anybody that happens to, don't get your nose bent out of joint. Just be aware. So, but here you have 10 different things. I would say look at each of them until you find one that you're happy with. Grammarly, I kind of like that. They do have a free thing that you can join up with, but when they start putting AI on it, that becomes something that you really have to patrol carefully. Do you guys know how AI works in regards to writing? AI, it's called artificial intelligence, not because it thinks for itself, but because it mimics the labels we attach to something we identify as being intelligent. And AI word generators, regardless of if they're writing for you, doing research for you, whatever, the reason that they work the way they do is not because they're trying to think up something, not because they're doing research, but they scour the internet and find statistical word use combinations. And so that's why I mentioned last week that having an AI generate citations for you is a bad idea, because it will just find statistical word combinations. And you can't really use that, because if you try to look up that citation on any sort of online library, it's not going to give you any usable information. All the AI has presented is not the actual citation, but what it has found, in this many cases, these words go together. In this many cases, these words go together, and they happen to have expression in an identity cloud around the word use of citation. And that's it. So I kind of like meeting somebody trustworthy at a county fair. Just be nice about it, but don't extend your trust too far. I mean, if anybody else has worked at a county fair, it's not to challenge your social morality or anything like that. Okay. Next thing I wanted to talk about is I wanted to show you a couple of the projects that have been turned in. Have any of you guys seen these at all? They are on your discussion board. I'm not requiring interaction with anybody else's project, but I would like you guys to look at them and use that to kind of help generate some ideas. Let's see. Now, one of the ones I really like, this Rock Art of Utah one, is really nicely done. I love that. It was put together. Brittany, are you here today? Is Brittany here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, and I would apologize for that if I felt bad about it. But I wanted you to just explain a little bit about what your project was, why you decided to do it, and how you organized it, and in what form you turned it in.
Okay, sure. So I did that Rock Art of Utah one. I chose it just because in that first week we were talking about the cave art throughout the world, and I was interested to see if any of Utah's rock art was similar or different and what our history of it was. Most of our rock art isn't found in caves, but just on rocks and sandstone, just because of our climate differences. So then I just did a bunch of different research on the history of rock art. Some of it was videos, some of it was from like trail guide people who go out on hiking. Some of it was from different museums. And then I just kind of learned about the different styles and time periods, and then picked some famous ones that showcased the different time periods and styles. And then I just put it in a PowerPoint because that was the easiest for me. And the first time I recorded it, it was like 12 minutes long. So I had to go back through and cut a bunch of stuff out and just kind of trim it down. And then just give the basic facts of all the different styles of rock art and what you can find here in Utah. And I actually just did it on PowerPoint. You can record a presentation and just do kind of your voiceover as you look at each slide. And so that's how I recorded it and then just submitted it as the video.
All right, excellent, perfect. And that's exactly what I was hoping to hear from you.
Good.
Because if you're going to do a PowerPoint, it needs to be recorded with a presenter's voice. Hopefully yours, if you can do that. If you don't feel comfortable with your own voice, that's fine. You can record it. I think it's the 8th tab over from the left, so it's almost to the far end of the right when you open up PowerPoint, and you can record it as a video. If you can't get that to work, because my computer, half the time it decides it will let me do that, half the time it doesn't. If you can't get that to work, pull up a PowerPoint, do a Teams meeting with just yourself, and then record yourself giving your PowerPoint to an invisible audience. And Brittany, hats off to you for getting PowerPoint to actually record as a video. That was great. And the only 3 video files that my Canvas and YouTube interface will recognize are MOV, MP4, and WAV. So if it's in any other file format, you've got to record it as one of those 3 files, and then we can use it as class. And the reason why I'm so specific about that is because we want people in the class to be able to see these. And so we need to be able to get them to work on the school platforms. Okay. Thank you again, Brittany. That was great. I really appreciate that. Mark, your microphone is still on.
Oh okay, yeah, I had my hand button raised earlier.
Okay, I didn't see it. Okay.
Yeah,
yes.
So around the time you were talking about not using AI to cite your sources, I remember just one incident of a lawyer who used AI to put together a citation list for a case.
And, no.
The AI cited fake cases and what I presume the exact same way that happened. So yeah, just be wary around using AI for a lot of things.
Oh, that is horrible.
Yeah, it just reminded me of that.
Okay, hopefully none of you guys will do that when you put together a court case. There is one AI engine on the internet, and I think it may have a free portal. I don't know for sure. I think you have to pay for it. And it is designed specifically for people writing papers in the academic space. And that will double check itself and give you valid citations. I did not put that on the list because it's one with a pay portal. And all these ones that I've given you should be ones that have free access for up to 6 or 7 citations. And for each paper, that's all you need. I think it's just 5 to 8 citations is what you need for any of the things we do. But yeah, Mark, thank you about that. It can be scary. AI, that's why I say AI is a fantastic tool, and all of us need to learn to use the tools, but I would not trust it blindly. And as we go down, we can see that there's this PDF. There's people have done papers that have been really good, and other movies. I think this one is, if Hayden's here, I believe this is the one that Hayden did a time lapse generating some art in the style of something. I can't remember exactly, but there's, and then Caleb, he did another one. It's I believe it was PowerPoint video as well. And these are great. Nothing is over, 5 or 6 minutes, which is awesome. I really appreciate that. But when you get a chance, look through these. And again, if you're going to choose the research route where you do a share a PDF, it needs to be in the file format so we can hear you talking or hear somebody talking through your slides. And you do not have to have all your narration on the slides. In fact, sometimes it's better if you don't, where you just have the bullet points. And like Caleb, he will usually narrate what he's talking about as he shows up each of the images. And Brittany did a lot of that as well. And I really appreciate that, because then we get to hear your thoughts about each of the things that you're showing on the slides. The two other ways, if you're doing research, the two other ways to do the research, present your research, are um, an essay where you include at least 8 photos that you're talking about, and then also a 5 citation annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is each of your sources. You have them in the correct MLA format. And what do you have to put on at the end of the last period in your MLA formatted citation? Do you guys remember?
Accessed on.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Thank you. And the format of the date doesn't really matter so much as long as you use the same format for each of the um, accessed on notes at the end of each citation. So it's not accessed on at the top of the page. It's not accessed on at the bottom. It's accessed on after the period following each citation. So if you use 5 citations, you're going to have 5 accessed on phrases. And they also have to all be in alphabetical order. If you're doing an annotated bibliography, each of the annotations are going to have 2 paragraphs. The first one is going to have a paragraph where you summarize the material. If it could be an interview, it could be a YouTube video, it could be a short documentary that you watched, it can be an article, even a book. But you're going to summarize it, tell us what you saw, and then the second of the 2 paragraphs is going to be a reflection where you talk about why it was important and how it related to the subject matter of your annotated bibliography.
Could it be like a .org or .edu website?
I think that'd be totally fine. As long as you get the citation in the proper format, I think it'll be just fine. And then summarize what the site is about, and then reflect and talk about why you used it in your annotation. I like that because the first time I was doing this after COVID, I put together a selection of sites that were 3D walkthroughs for like areas and museums that were really important to Renaissance artwork and architecture. And that was really nice because sometimes you had to go to one of these .org type websites, and the citation was for the site in general, and the site was walkthrough of the Sistine Chapel, and the different areas. So yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. And then the other one, or the third one, is the PDF where it's basically an article that you include 8 photos. And the ones that have been turned in have been really good. I think the only times people have lost points for the most part has been because of the citations. And that's pretty much it. So just be careful with the citations. And if anybody needs help, there is a writing help on campus, and they are usually pretty good. I think they got rid of all the dunderheads a couple of years ago, so most of them you can trust. I'm sorry. That was probably derogatory, so we'll strike dunderheads from the permanent record of the meeting.
I do work at the Writing Center, and we take walk-ins appointments. We can help with any and all citations.
Tell me they did get rid of all the dunderheads.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I'm safe.
Might have gotten some new ones, but I'm still learning.
No, but what I love about the Writing Center is everybody that I've met has been extremely personable. They're very easy to work with, and all of them share our pain for writing as art students. I mean, they all know that you're an artist or you're fascinated with art because you're not a professional writer, for generally. And there are rare exceptions, but everybody there has been very easy to work with, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Milo. That's excellent to know. Well, and then for the discovery ones that people do, I've gotten some really interesting requests. Pretty much, if you can tie it directly into the material in this class, then that's good. I've had people have done, like one person did they did a series of examinations of different video games that are available on the market and how they related directly to different different periods of art history. You know, what landscapes they worked from and things like that. They were able to show that one video game used landscapes from Van Gogh paintings, which I thought was pretty cool. And of course, Van Gogh isn't in the scope of our class, but you know, a discovery project might be playing through a video and then demonstrating how that video relates to like an actual Roman villa or something like this. Aubrey, yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about like the discovery projects. Would it be okay if I included my kids in them?
As long as you're okay with that, it's fine.
Okay.
You know, you're the parent, and you're legally responsible for them. So if you're okay with that, I think it would be just fine.
Okay.
I'm going to give a couple examples of different discovery projects that we've had in the past. One person remade or revisited a famous painting by going through the closets of her and her roommates, taking all the clothes, and then setting up on the grass outside of her apartment. She set up the clothes and then refigured them, rearranged them so they rebuilt this painting with the right color, the shapes, everything. That was pretty cool. Another person did a video where they pieced together and I think I may have told you guys about this already. They pieced together going down to the Virgin River, finding a source of clay, the process of clarifying the clay so that they could use it, and then all over this, they're doing the voiceover of this is from people in the area, the archaeological evidence demonstrating this is how they did it, and giving the names and spaces who found what and where the sites were, and that was really fascinating. He would cut it down to about 4.5 minutes, I think. We've also had people mixing paints and restructuring, rebuilding original paintings with the equipment and materials that people had access to at the time. Rebuilding ceramic pots from like a Mississippians culture, doing different things like that. So that there's a lot of different types of things you can do with a discovery project. Caleb, I think we mentioned last week, made a tea pie, and he used the reference that he used was actually he found a tea pie in a Baroque era painting, I believe it was, as part of a still life, and somebody else recreated a Renaissance meal from a painting showing the Renaissance meal. So he found things that he felt were pretty close to the dishes that were being shown in each of the items in the painting, and so it turned out really well. So there's, as long as you can tie it in directly like that. One person even put together, they drew the costumes for a traditional dance that would have been performed by one of the cultures we looked at within the scope of the class, and it was Japanese, and they were able to tie it directly in to some of the Japanese art that was shown. So this is the kind of dance that they were showing in this painting, and so that was really fascinating. But today I had a conversation with somebody who they needed help coming up with ideas. Talked about what their hobbies were, and for each of their 6 or 7 hobbies, we were able to find a project that could relate directly to the subject matter of this class, and that worked out pretty well. So there's always, if you have doubts, if you're confused, just give me a holler, email me, text me, whatever, and we'll walk through, and you can come up with several different ideas. And this person now has a half a dozen different ideas. If you miss a deadline or you want to do 2 or 3 projects at the same time, that's not a big deal. I think I have all the projects online right now. If you are, for example, if you have an opportunity to go to Japan, and while you're in Japan, you want to put together 3 projects from your trip, that'd be just fine. And as long as each project represents its own 3 to 5 hours of work, that is perfectly fine. The one thing I don't want to have happen is have somebody repackage a project that they did from an earlier term with me in my class, or try to put 2 or 3 projects together in the same. Okay, does somebody else raise their hand? Or Catherine? All
I
right.
just joined.
What's that?
I
Oh,
just
you
joined,
just
so
joined.
you're fine.
Oh, okay. All right. My computer is beeping at me and I have no idea what to do about it. Okay. All right. Mystery solved. Thank you. Okay. We blathered on enough about that. Now I want to really fast go through the stuff that we're actually going to be here to talk about. Etruscans, Greeks, and Romans. And to the magic of modern technology, the modern era actually ended in about 1959. So whenever anybody tells you that they're using modern technology, think Airstream toasters. Okay, here we go. Now, I know you guys have seen this art. Here we are going to be getting into a little bit of the N-word, nudity. So I really hope that nobody's terribly offended. When the people that really underscored and made transatlantic slavery happen. Ironically, this group of people were called, this was the Enlightenment era. And they are the ones that produced things like our modern division of, our modern divisions of scientific research. They're the ones that created the definition of knowledge that John Dewey used for his decimal system for cataloging in a library. These are the ones that came up with the idea, invented the phrase, the Dark Ages. You guys have heard about the Dark Ages, I'm certain. Can anybody raise a hand and tell me what the Dark Ages are? Or what they refer to?
It's the period from when the Roman Empire collapsed to the Renaissance.
Yeah, exactly. And what is so ironic about that, thank you, Mark, it is only the period between the fall of the Western Roman Empire and after the end of the Eighth Crusade, or the 1350s. The reason why that's important is that the Roman Empire continued for another 1,000 years. And it produced the world's biggest buildings and some of the most fantastic art. But we don't really see it very much because of the categorization of knowledge developed by the people during the Enlightenment. And this is where we get the idea that all of the things we identify as beautiful, as people having our roots in European culture, this is where we get those ideas from. And it was essentially a resurgence of Mediterranean culture by the specifically concentrating on the Etruscans, the Greeks, and the Romans. So our ideas about everything from law to religion comes down to this culture. Now, this image that I'm showing you right here, I think this is a beautiful image. This is Etruscan. The Etruscans, there is a lot of academic overlap about which cultures came first. Basically, 3 cultures thrived, overlapping maybe 60 to 80% of their culture. But it looks like maybe the Etruscans were a little bit older, then the Greeks are a little bit more recent, and the Romans are a little bit more recent. But there's so much overlap that I don't really think we can separate them very clearly. But these are the guys that pretty much defined how the Renaissance artists viewed beauty. And as we go through, you can kind of see how these guys relate to each other. And there are some differences. But I love this kind of thing. Do you remember a little bit about what we saw with the Babylonians and everything? We get these kind of really almond-shaped eyes. The Egyptians and Babylonians both used them, Akkadians. You get really strong outlines for the eye, and they have these typical, this angle where they slope up as they go out towards the ears. And they do have a very pronounced shape to them, like we saw in art from like the standard of Ur, for example, and Egyptian tomb paintings. And I'm just mentioning that because I think it's really interesting. We do get the canon that was used for the human form is very approachable. It's very comfortable and recognizable to us. We see these proportions, we recognize these proportions. They were using the golden section or the golden ratio in a lot of the artwork that they were producing. And this is one of the really important Etruscan works, because a lot of what people think we know about the Etruscans comes from extrapolation, examining these kinds of objects. Then this is a very Greek type of form, where we get, you got the Greek nose, you got the realistically appearing hair. It reads as realistic. We get the fingers, the shapes that they are. The reason why these kind of forms are important is that Polykleitos is one of the Greek sculptors who really subtly distorted the human figure to fit more exactly into that expectations of the golden section. The golden section is an interesting proportion because it is prevalent in almost everything that we observe as humans. It's something that is found to be a proportion consistent with things that humans share, identities as being beautiful. Not share identities, I'm sorry, share. The golden section seems to be common among the objects that human beings identify as beautiful. And what is interesting about this, has anybody ever heard of Pythagoras? You guys know who that is?
The guy who invented the Pythagorean theorem, or
people can argue about that, and people have argued about that, but he is definitely the guy that got his marketing on it. He's the one who branded the theorem, because the Egyptians were using the theorem about 2,500 years before Pythagoras was a twinkle in his parents' eyes. But yeah, it basically comes down to a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Everybody knows that. But the reason why it's associated with Pythagoras, and I'm going to stop the sharing for just a little bit, is that at this time in Greek culture, they're the ones that kind of defined a lot of how we identify in Western culture as secret or semi-religious secret societies. And with Pythagoras, his society, and these we can call them cults if we want to. That's how a lot of anthropologists refer to them. A cult is essentially a religious structure that is identified as a club, what we would identify as a club, and you have to have identifiers to get in or to show that you're a member of it. And this is a lot of religions today follow these kind of guidelines. Like, for example, to be identified as a Christian, a lot of Christian groups will mark the sense of separation through a ceremony like baptism, for example, or something akin to it. You get baptisms of all sorts. For Islam, it's the recitation of the I can't remember the word. Of course, it just left my mind. I think it's the Shahada, something like that, where it's you basically say with conviction, there's only one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's the equivalent, and that is important because that's always been around in religions. But with the Greeks, the reason why I'm talking about all this is a big part of the religious observation was a specific way of looking at the world through the canonization of both forms and proportions. And very quickly, during the lifetime of Pythagoras, the people that followed his thoughts about applying math to help understand the structures that God's used to make the world, his branding went out, for the most part. And I'm trying. I am not being disrespectful at all. I'm just trying to use nomenclature that most of us are familiar with for this. Religion is the word that we use for religion is a word that actually has its roots in other words that mean making covenants or covenant keeping, where it's a way of navigating the universe through showing your devotion or showing your respect by making changes in your life. That's what it amounts to. That's what religion is, with the intent being that the world becomes a better person and you become a better person by participating in creating a better world. And for a lot of the Greek cult religions, this was demonstrated by having specific identifiers that would mark you in a group as belonging to, like the cult of Dionysus, for example, the cult of Diana. And what made Pythagoras and his group unusual and significant for us is they felt that there wasn't so much a deity, an anthropomorphic deity like Diana or Zeus. It was more following the idea of a god that structured the entire universe, and that because overall structure and form became the identifier signifying this idea of a universal deity, math became very important, math and proportion. Now, what does that have to do with anything? What that has to do is, if we look at a statistical sampling, and this is how facial recognition was born, and the software was born throughout the 90s. If we take statistical samples of everybody on the planet and we put them together, we can find very quickly that human faces, human hands, human forms, human structures fall very quickly into golden section ratios. And it's weird. If you hold it, I think we may have talked about this last week. You hold up your hand becomes a golden section rectangle just by the way it is. And each of your fingers, the proportions of knuckle and joint to knuckle and joint bear the relationship in general of the golden section ratio to each other. And this is important because it's not, no single human being will demonstrate the golden ratio, but when UCLA started compiling data points on human faces, what they found by averaging human faces together, by matching up the pupils, so you scale the face or head up and down so that the pupils line up. What they found is that the aggregate average was a perfect golden ratio, which I think is just amazing. The reason why Greek sculpture looks the way it does is because sculptors like Praxiteles, who made that sculpture we just looked at, was enamored of this idea of perfect form. And so the human form was slightly distorted to demonstrate the golden section ratio from body part to body part. And so that's why you get bathers and Venus looking a little bit different than humans actually normally do, is because Greek sculptors started distorting the human form to match these perfect ratios of form. And that's how we get this idea of this perfect God form. That's what the Romans started using. And when people started uncovering the Greek and Roman sculptures at the beginning of the Renaissance and scraping off all the bubbling paint, the Renaissance sculptors were thinking that white marble was the ideal color to work with, and it represented perfection. And the closer you came to these golden ratio forms, represented the more ideal human form. And originally, that was not what Praxiteles and Pythagoras were doing. They were they were knowingly distorting the human form to demonstrate the golden ratio, because then it brought it into the realm of deity, and it became those kinds of forms, those kinds of tones, those ratios of sound, even ratios in how plays are structured. Then they became manifestations of something of a sacrament, demonstrating the symbolism of deity. Did anybody follow that? I know my brain works like a pachinko machine, but I hope you guys could follow that, because the idea is this is not what human beings look like at the time. And that was not the intent, to make people believe this is what humans look like. This is a demonstration of the divine proportion. So even though a human model may have been used for this, the specific tilt of the head, the way the arm is shaped, it was designed not to be a typical human. It was designed to demonstrate a sacrament pointing you towards deity. And that's why they look the way they do.
Andrew, is this sort of the ancient version of how we airbrush supermodels on the cover of magazines?
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. And it is interesting because there were actually, I can't remember the names of the sculptors, but these sculptors who did this kind of stuff were like rock stars of their day, because they would get the proportions so ethereal, and people were just blown away at the time. But yeah, you airbrush all the pimples off of somebody in a movie, so that the close-up just shows the quote-unquote perfect skin, which I'm going to launch into just a little aside about perfection right now. Just that word pisses me off because nobody uses it correctly. Perfect does not mean it looks like it was made by engineered Japanese nanobots from the future. Perfect means complete. It is a synonym for the word complete or finished. So when you're done with a painting that you've made, or anything that you've made, when you pulled muffins out of the oven, if you're done cooking them, they're perfect, regardless of whether or not they look like they belong on a cover model. On the issue of St. George Today or whatever regional magazine there is. If it's complete, if it's done, if it's finished, it is exactly what perfect means. So when you do your next painting, your next photo, your next digital image, whatever it is, when you're done and you're satisfied with it, then it's perfect by definition. All right. And extending that a little bit more, right now, wherever you are the best you've ever been, because you are older, you're wiser, you're smarter, you're better than you have ever been in your previous incarnations of, in the current lifetime that you're in. And so right now you are absolutely perfect. Just keep that in the back of your head. But that's what perfect actually means. Anyway, going back to the topic of the class that I'm actually getting paid to teach. You can see how the Roman, look at the Roman stuff. They are putting a little bit more of stuff that you might recognize as being realistically approachable in, but they are still distorting the human form, so it has that kind of deification element to it. And of course, the deification is an adherence to those golden section ratios, that even though everybody relates to them, there's not a single human person that demonstrates the perfect golden ratio in a human form. That's not entirely right. There are two living people right now that if you, and I can't remember who the university was that identified them as the most accurate human expression of the golden ratio. Anybody want to guess who those two people are? They're both actors, by the way. For the male, it's Denzel Washington. For the female, it's Vanessa Williams. Isn't that
I
interesting?
think there was Jensen Ackles was also an actor that they considered, or someone had considered, was a golden ratio for the human face.
That doesn't surprise me. He is pretty dreamy. I absolutely loved him in Supernatural. But as we as we move on, I want you to think about some of these things. Just have them in the back of your head as we look at this artwork, how these things relate to how people look back. My tirade about the Enlightenment era scholars who kind of defined how we look at the past is these people dismissed 1,000 years of artistic achievement and development around the world by saying that the Dark Ages consisted of the fall of Western Rome and the birth of the Renaissance. People are doing more realism during the Carolingian period, which is between the 7th and 9th centuries, than they were during the fall of Rome. And you get the people of Ifa artisans that we will talk about, the Yoruba kingdoms and Ifa in particular, were producing photorealist bronzes over 1,000 years before the Renaissance even started happening. And this was in Western Central Africa. And so a lot, as we move forward looking at art history, the two conceits that really frustrate me, and Joey can attest to this, sadly, because he's heard my tirades. The first conceit is that people before us were dumber than us, and that is simply not true on any level. The second conceit is if it didn't happen in Europe, it wasn't worth looking at. You look at the canon of artists that most people studied up until about 20 years ago, they were primarily, 97% of them were dead white European men. And that is not who produced all the world's art. It is, if anybody wants to look into this anymore, look up the Guerrilla Girls. They're a group of artists and art critics who really brilliantly articulate these ongoing conceits and how they impact our understanding of the art world. Anyway, going back to the lesson, some of the things that define Etruscan artwork is, aside from the area, we're talking about Mediterranean. Etruscans, it depends on who you talk to, but maybe 700 BC to about 250 BC, maybe. We're looking at that kind of cloud of time. Some of the things that we look at, they're the ones that give us these recognizable sarcophagus shapes that are common to Greek and Roman architecture. You get this kind of this rectangle that's based around the human form. But some of the things that demarcate the Etruscans is their primary material that survived is terracotta. Who knows what terracotta is? What is it? It's a fancy word for what material?
Clay, pottery.
Yeah, it's clay. But we use the word terracotta because we are academics and we want to validate our education. That's what the word is used for, essentially. Terracotta is clay. It was generally it's going to be low fire, maybe sometimes air fire, air dried, but that was the principal material that survives from a lot of Etruscan stuff. I don't think it was the principal material that survived, but a lot of the stuff that survived from the Etruscans, apparently they were not really pleasant when they ruled the Romans. And so when the Romans gained power and ascendancy over the Etruscan overlords, they reclaimed a lot of the Etruscan structures and transformed them into Roman structures. So there's not a lot of original Etruscan architecture that remains. There is some, but not an awful lot. Some of the other things that are marked by Etruscans, if we look at this, what thing did we see last week that these figures remind you of?
Kind of reminds me of like Egypt, Mesopotamia figures.
Yeah. The Standard of the Egyptian funerary paintings, things like that, where you have the human form is distorted where the head is a little bit bigger. You get this particular human form shape that we saw in that standard of Ur. You get the eyes look very Egyptian, very Babylonian, very Mesopotamian. And it's just kind of an interesting take on the human figure. But this is how, whether or not that's how people actually looked, that is how people are portrayed. Symbolically, it was important to them. So I want you, as you go forward, look, this Met site is really, really good. It has a lot of things to look at about the Etruscans. Look at the surviving Etruscan architecture. The three colors that they love to use is red, yellow, and blue. The primary colors that we're familiar with. They really loved using those. So check all that stuff out. Sarcophagus of the Spouses, that is the piece that we looked at, the very first piece for this week's lesson, where it's the two spouses. These are the guys that took leisurely eating to an art form. You would lay down on the floor or on pillows when you ate, or on a couch. I think that anytime that you can extend an opportunity to be lazy, I think that's great. And definitely look up the Etruscan civilization before the Romans. So watch all this kind of stuff. These videos are all like 2 to 7 minutes long at the most, I think. And tell me if none of the videos don't work. Some of them are videos. Some of them are going to be websites with images, like the Met sites. I love their stuff. I'll show you one with the Greek art. This is what the Met site is. This is classical Greece, the Greek art. We can see right here, there's two principal forms of depiction that the Greeks are known for. The one is the red figure, like this, and one is black figure. And this is, the red figure is when the background is painted, and the figure is actually made by painting the figure with wax, and then you paint the rest of the pottery black. And when you fire it, the wax comes off, and all you have are the red figures on a black background. And then you get the black figure, which is where the figure is actually painted onto the clay body. And this is, we're calling it black figure even though it's not, because the things are painted onto the clay body. And this is called a puxis, P-Y-X-I-S, puxis. And it's basically a prestige item. Does anybody know what the term prestige item refers to?
Would it be an item that showed prestige, like it showed how high in society you were?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. People that cannot afford to lay around and eat their meals laying down on their couch could not generally afford to tie up their money. They wouldn't have the surplus money to tie it up into things that you would just leave on a mantle or leave on a table just to show off. Prestige items are essentially fancy objects that you have around, so that when visitors to your home come in, they will see that you have enough extra wealth that you can just lay it on the table. So that's, puxis is a box. You might have jewelry in it. You might have oil in it. Doesn't really matter. It is designed specifically to show it off to your friends, basically, or your spouse, your partner, your buddy, who you want to present something that represents that you have enough wealth that you can shower it on. And again, it sounds like I'm being sarcastic, and I am a little bit, but not really. We do this today. What are the kinds of things that we do to show off how much money we have today, or how much social standing we have today?
Louis Vuitton bags,
What's that?
designer handbags.
Yeah, handbags. What else?
Cars?
Exotic cars.
Yeah, exactly. What else? Ray-Ban sunglasses. What's that, Brittany?
Oh, I was just gonna say like house size and like extras like boats or pools or things like that.
Yeah, and the real difference I think between a prestige item and something that you have is, are you actively using it, or did you buy it specifically to park in your driveway to show off to your neighbors? You know, I want to get to a point eventually where I can have a Tesla, not as a prestige item, but as a car that I'm actually going to be using. I mean, that'd be awesome. But, you know, I will settle for having a Tesla. I'll just park on the driveway so everybody driving by can see that I have a Tesla, that I'm so important in society that I can own a Tesla and just leave it on my driveway and never use it. You know, because I'm just that big of a pile of hot stuff, you know. Anyway, going on. Absolutely no social commentary is intended. I'm just making an observation. But that's what this stuff represented. You wanted to show off to people. And, you know, part of the social things that we do, exchanging gifts, when you and I exchange gifts, we are doing it primarily to show somebody how much we care about them, what they mean to us. And those generally become prestige items. It's not intended to show off, but they do demonstrate in a concise space, you know, a concise amount of material, that we do care. And, you know, a lot of that stuff, you know, the kind of objects that we look at from an art historical perspective, a lot of the objects that we look at demonstrate gifts for people. You know, this a frieze from a tomb. Now, tombs are kind of interesting because a lot of times, if you are wealthy enough in society or you have big enough pull in society, you can have your tomb built for you while you're still alive, and it demonstrates how much efficacy you had or how much importance you had to the society in general, or how much wealth you could command. Now, this is not entirely an ego-driven thing. I think that is very important to know. A lot of the times, the importance of a tomb also demonstrated the wealth of the society altogether. You look at, for example, if the Egyptian pyramids were built as tombs, they are also built, you know, if you're a visitor from another country and you go into Cairo, you're going to see the pyramids off to the side, and the fact that any culture commanded the work power and the wealth to build a structure of that magnitude demonstrates the power of the society as a whole. So it's not just an ego type of thing, but these are the kinds of objects so they demonstrate people putting their best foot forward, essentially, and but doing the best that they could as a society, and that's what it represents. I want you to look at the Greek architecture. I want you to look at these other things. The Ancient Greece in 18 minutes, I think, is a terrific video where it gives you a lot of the background. And we're going to look really briefly at the Doryphorus. Now, this, I think, is really an important video to watch. Doryphorus, I think, essentially means guy who holds a stick, is what it's Greek for. And I like the Smart History videos because they do have actual paid art historians talking about stuff. But this is about a 6-minute video, and I think it talks quite a bit about the things that were important to the Greek sculptor and the people around them. So we are going to watch this. Can you guys see the video screen? Okay.
So much ancient Greek art and literature has been lost, and often we only have echoes of the original. And that's the case with one of the most famous works of art to come down to us from antiquity, Polyclitus's Canon, which is known in the modern world as the Doryphorus, which means spear bearer.
So Polyclitus wrote a book called the Canon in the 5th century BCE, where he defined what beauty was in sculpture. And he made a sculpture in bronze to go with this.
Okay, I'm just pausing this. Polyclitus wrote that book, but where do the Greeks get their ideas about beauty, the proportions? Who's the guy that's blamed on that for that? Pythagoras. And this, so when we talk about proportions and beauty, what we are actually talking about is the Greek perspective on religious observation, or one of the potential Greek perspectives on religious observation. Because the more perfect, exact the proportions are, the closer you're getting to not necessarily an image of deity, but a symbol of deity. Okay, so these objects, the naked guy holding the stick, it's not, they're not celebrating necessarily that. This becomes a sacrament demonstration of reverence. Does everybody understand the connection there? Okay.
Book to illustrate its precepts. But neither the book nor the sculpture survive. All we have are echoes. And we're looking at one here today in the museum in Naples.
It's a Roman copy in marble, and it's one of dozens and dozens of copies of the original lost Doryphorus.
And this particular one was found in the Palestra in Pompeii. That is a place where athletes would work out. And you can see why. We have a beautiful nude figure, something for athletes to aspire to, something perfect. And that was exactly Polyclitus's idea.
We think that the original canon, that is the book that described Polyclitus's ideas, thought about beauty as rooted in a kind of mathematical precision in the relationship of one part of the body to another part of the body, one part of the body to all other parts of the body. And it was the relationship and the balance, the harmony between these elements that created beauty.
And this mathematical underpinning echoes the work of Pythagoras. One of the things that Pythagoras wrote about was how in music, what makes harmony is the mathematical relationships between notes. So Pythagoras theorized that that kind of mathematical thinking, that those ratios, if they created harmony in music, they might also be the key to understanding harmony and beauty in the human body.
And so what we're seeing, in essence, is an illustration of a set of philosophical and mathematical ideas that reveals to us so much about ancient Greece. It's so tantalizing to look at this sculpture and believe that this is very close to what Polyclitus produced. The problem is there are variations among all of the copies that have been made, and we don't know which is closer to the original.
But we do know that we're looking at a male figure who is ideally beautiful, not only in his proportions, but also in his musculature, the way that his ribs are articulated, his pectoral muscles, the muscles in his arms. There's an attention to the human body and the potential for movement.
The original sculpture was made at a point in ancient Greek history that art historians often call the early classical, when sculptures are moving out of the stiffer, more symmetrical, more abstracted representation of the human body and moving to a newfound naturalism, moving to a carefully observed body. But we're not seeing an individual here. This is not a portrait. This is an ideal representation, something that the Greeks were really interested in. What would the most perfect body look like? His weight has shifted onto his right leg and is moving off of his left leg. It is that transitional moment when he's about to lift that leg and perhaps move it forward as he begins to walk. This is a system of representation that we call contrapposto, which literally means the shifting of the axes of the body against each other. Contrapposto beautifully reflects the Greek interest in the human body in all of its complexity. Look at the way that the weight leg, the right leg's hip, thrusts upward and compresses the torso on that side. And in opposition to that, look at the way that the left hip hangs down just above the leg with the bent knee.
So it's more than just the harmony of the parts of the body. It's also about this relationship between weight bearing and not weight bearing, of tension and relaxation. If we think of the archaic figures, where the body is much more symmetrical, the weight is equally placed on both legs, those figures have a sense to me of transcendence, of not quite being in the same world that I exist in. But this figure, which is asymmetrical, appears to exist in my world.
But it's important to remember that we're seeing a Roman marble copy of an older bronze sculpture from ancient Greece. And there are some changes that had to be made. Marble is heavy and it cracks much more easily, so it has to be supported supported in a way that bronze sculptures do not. And so we see a support that's been added, a kind of tree trunk that's necessary to help support the great weight of this stone. In addition, you can see that there's a bridge that attaches the right wrist to the right hip, and this is to help stabilize the sculpture. And in fact, you can see that despite that, the hand had been broken off. And then finally, the original bronze sculpture would have held a spear in his left hand that would likely have just rested against his left shoulder.
And I think a good question is, why are there so many Roman copies of this sculpture by Polycletus? And the answer to that is the ancient Romans loved Greek art and collected it and copied it. And the wealthy elites of ancient Rome put sculptures like this in their gardens, in their villas, to display their erudition, their sense of being cultured.
And in this case, in a palestra, in a kind of gymnasium, to inspire Roman athletes to this Greek ideal.
All right. What is aggravating, I think, a little bit to us, or what can be aggravating, is does anybody have access to the original? No, all we have is access to what we believe, what everybody tells us are copies. And I think that can be a little bit frustrating because we don't really know exactly what people were thinking. But I don't know. I have a hard time minding it too much, because what I do like is it seems to, what we examine and look at, it seems to bear out thinking, are thinking about these kind of cultures now, as we get access to a lot more information. In the early Renaissance, artists were writing, and critics were writing that white was the purest of colors, and marble was the purest of forms, and that the purest art had to be of the nude figure. And the reason is because that was the stuff that was surfacing. That was what people were finding. The reason why white marble was being found more often than not is that the people that were collecting and finding these sculptures for rich patrons saw that the deteriorating paint that was painted on these sculptures originally was bubbling and looking really disgusting, and so they cleaned it off. So these assumptions that people had about beauty during the Renaissance were based on an assumption that the distorted forms that they were receiving was the original form. The distortion being that the workers were cleaning off the disgusting looking paint. And so we look at that and extrapolate it backwards. What the Romans were finding, making these copies of the Greek originals, nobody really knows what that original was, but we're guessing that the extrapolation we have from what the Romans thought about it is the reality. So whenever we look at stuff like this, we've got to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe we don't know the exact context. Maybe we don't know exactly what it looked like. But unfortunately, that's the best we have. So I'm sorry I can't give you an exact. I don't know anybody old enough to live through that time, or at least who's admitting to being old enough to live through that time. So all we have is extrapolation, and that's what we unfortunately have to work with. Now, I do, in the module, I do include a section where it does talk about the paint that was used. Everything that, this conceit, again, that the Renaissance people had and the Enlightenment people had, that white represented purity, is nothing but a conceit, because by microscopically examining the surface of the marble, it has been pretty consistently shown that the people who made these things originally did paint them. The founder, does anybody know who Severus Septimus is? Who's Severus Septimus? Ryan.
He was a Roman emperor.
Yeah. He was a Roman emperor who founded London. Everybody knew that he was Caucasian. Everybody. He was Caucasian. This is one of the arguments that the Enlightenment people used to justify white supremacy and slavery. Severus Septimus actually was born in Libya. His wife came from Syria. He was the first really black African Roman emperor who made good, and he was the founder of London. The reason we know that is because of the historical records that surfaced after people did microscopic analysis of his sculptures in London, the portraits that were linked to him, and discovered that he actually his skin was painted dark. Isn't that interesting? But nobody knew that until I think it was 1997 when that microscopic analysis was done. Ryan, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, I was going to say something about him being North African, and there's actually a beautiful poetry book kind of written about one of his concubines that I'll try to look up real quick and post in the messages if anyone's interested.
No, I think that would be really fun. But it's kind of interesting how, everybody knows things, and I'm doing massive foam finger football game air quotes about about knows. As we gain more information, history is rarely written truthfully in stone. Usually the history that's written in stone is what the people that paid for the stone to be written in want you to think. History, the more we learn, the more we get a broader cloud of understanding around what history actually is. How many of you knew already that Romans and Greeks painted their sculptures lifelike colors? Yeah, but 20, 30 years ago, everybody knew, and again, massive foam finger air quotes, that they were white marble. That was the way they always were. That's what the 14th century Renaissance scholars knew. Okay, Ryan, you found that? You posted it in there in the chat? All right, excellent, great. And and Severus Septimus, the founder of London, knowing that he was a Caucasian, he was actually, I think it was his grandfather that became wealthy enough to buy a citizenship. And he is a real example of basically, the self-made success culture that really identified the success of the Roman Empire. It wasn't until the Romans started practicing systemic racism and elitism that their culture really began to decline, which I think is in the West, which I think is really interesting. One of the reasons why the Roman culture continued, the Roman Empire continued after Constantine moved to Turkey, was because he continued, the path to citizenship and earned elitism. And that, I think that was a big reason why the Roman Empire was able to last another millennium before it fell apart. Again, it fell apart because of systemic racism, or I'm not going to say because of, I'm going to say consistent with the powerful establishment of systemic elitism and racism, which I just think that's really interesting. Anyway, moving on. So we talked about Greeks, blah, blah, blah. Most of the Roman pantheon that people are aware of today is actually the Latinized Greek pantheon. And I would be willing to suspect that a lot of the Greek pantheon is the the Hellenized Etruscan pantheon. And that would not surprise me at all. And it looks like the Etruscan pantheon is an adaptation of what they knew about the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the other Mesopotamians. That would not surprise me at all. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. What that means, I think, is just like we talked about last week, that today we're built on thousands of years of history. Our ancestors thousands of years ago were built on thousands of years of history before them too. Each of us have all that stuff boiling up inside of us. Like Simon and Garfunkel said, nobody's an island. All of us are essentially represent the stew of the people that came before us, which probably is not the most pleasant of metaphors, but there you go. This is when we look at Romans, a lot of their stuff is based on their celebritizing Greek art. But I think that the Roman architecture, I think that's one of the things that is really astounding to me. Some of the things that you'll see that is different from Greek stuff. I'm going to get to artsy.net and share this tab. When we look at this sculpture, get rid of that. We look at this sculpture, how is this immediately different from the Greek sculpture that we looked at when we first looked at the Greek stuff?
It has clothes on.
Yeah, there's clothing for one thing. A lot of the older Greek material did have clothing too. A lot of the clothing was painted on, and you'll see that in a couple of the videos. But yeah, there's this, if the idealized human form becomes something of an expression of deity, then you don't really want to hide it. And that's when this, idea of immortalizing the nude human form. Oh, when I first started studying art history, I remember asking my mom, what's the difference between naked and nude? Do you want to know what she told me? Naked is caught by surprise, nude is on purpose. And that's pretty much, in the art context, that's pretty much what the difference is. Just remember that. But yeah, we see he has clothing on, he's wearing this armor. Let's see, this is Augustus. Okay, a lot of the times, people did not look like this. Romans did not look like this. We think. I'm just extrapolating. You look at tomb paintings, they looked a little bit more naturalistic. But keeping in with this idea that the idealized human form becomes an image of deity, then if you're like an emperor, or if you're like the empress, if you're somebody who's really important and wants everybody to believe that you're important, you want them to celebrate your form as the idealized Greek athlete with the absolutely most beautiful set of ornamented armor you could ever get, the perfect haircut. I mean, this is going to be what everybody sees of you 1,000 years in the future. So you want it to be idealized and perfect. One of the big differences between Roman sculpture and Greek sculpture is that you'll start to see things like later Roman stuff will have wrinkles in the face. You'll start to see people's features, naturalistic features being expressed. You'll start to see broken noses, things like that. This guy looks a little bit more approachable, a little bit more realistic than perhaps some of the Greek stuff that we've seen. Still, the neck is a little bit longer than normal, but you do get a little bit of these things like folds around between the nose and the mouth. Maybe some worry lines in the forehead, which you don't see in a lot of surviving Greek sculpture. This guy is a really good example of strong Roman sculpture. Where's the perfection here? Well, the perfection lies in perhaps the proportions of his skull, but his eyes never looked like that during the lifetimes of the people that were around this sculpture when it was made. His eyes were actually painted, and his skin was painted, and a lot of the features that are missing were painted. So the hair would have been painted the color that was there in real life. So, something to be mindful of that I think is really interesting that we a lot of times forget. And we look at a lot of the Roman architecture. One of the things you really notice that you'll remember later on as we go through the course is this particular style of archway. And I like the Khan Academy stuff. They have a lot of really good short articles that talk about a lot of this kind of stuff. We look at different things like this kind of rounded ceiling. This is going to be identifiable as Roman. as opposed to Greek. One of the differences is the Romans really loved using everything that had anything to do with the circle, so you get a lot of these rounded arches. They also liked doing things with cement where they would take extra weight out. So you get this kind of cutout shape. And I can't remember, I don't know if they're called coffers or what, but can you guys kind of see that cutout shape there in the interior of that dome? That is designed specifically to remove extra weight. So you still get the structural strength of the cement or the stone, but you don't have the added weight that's been removed. So they're very aware of geometry. And one thing that is interesting is, see this little triangle right here? That is identifiable now as like the Roman roof line. Does anybody want to guess what that angle is? It's 22.5 degrees. Now that starts really showing up around the Mediterranean with the Etruscan architecture. 22.5 degrees, that roof, that shallow triangle. It's interesting that 22.5 degrees is half of 45 degrees, which represents one side of a right angle. I just think that that's interesting. But that is, the Greeks use that quite a bit. And in a lot of their architecture, you see that all through the Greek temples and everything. A lot of the Greek roof lines for temples were flat, but when they did do angles, they copied the Etruscan angle. And then the Romans used that angle as well. Where does that show up today? You show up at any self-righteous, pompous federal type building, it's going to have those kind of roof lines. They want people to make the association. You see this a lot during the Enlightenment, during the Baroque periods. People want to underscore government validity by tying in to this idealized version of history, which meant that the Greeks and the Romans really established our laws and our society, as white Europeans. So that's why these kinds of roof lines and arches show up quite a bit. So definitely go through this kind of thing, and you see a variation between a corbelled arch is when stones are stacked in sequence and then the arch is rounded out. And then the Roman style arch, the true arch, is when the stones are used to establish the shape of the arch, and that the arch then also the actual weight of the stones reinforce the structure of the arch. And that is innovation in architecture that is very strongly associated with Roman architecture, or the Romans. So please go through all this. Beginner's Guide to Ancient Rome is really good. Check out the Pantheon. That is that thing that we looked at really briefly with the inside arch, or the inside dome, sorry. The reason, there's a number of these reasons this is very important. Oh, and this is Arch of Septimius Severus. Who was the founder of London? Follow my dancing mouse. Who's the founder of London? Anybody?
Severus?
Yeah. And so we're looking at other architecture that he paid for. And some Roman emperors were actually geometers and architects. One of my favorites is a guy named Vitruvius. He was a massive architect. He was also pretty high up in the governmental structure of Rome. He wrote 10 books that are really important. I advise all of you to read them. Each of the books are between 20 and 40 pages long. It's the 10 books of Vitruvius, and that Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, the guy who's making a square and a circle altogether, is derived from what Vitruvius had to say. Another really good one is, the guy that died at the beginning of the Gladiator movie, who defined masculine virtue. Anybody remember his name?
Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius. He was another Roman emperor that was actually also an architect and a poet and a philosopher. But a lot of the stuff that's attributed as to being built by emperors, they're just the ones who paid for it. But I'm sorry, I'm getting over time a little bit because I got excited talking about this stuff and whining about things. Any questions? I just blew you away with the fire hose of knowledge. Yes. Okay. Who? Catherine.
So the only question I have is just that as far as the research and discovery project, I'm assuming you might have talked about this before I was able to come on and ask about it. So you have it to where it's just that link of all those videos. Are those just mainly all the examples you were able to save up and have as far as like ideas for us to think about for the research or discovery project?
Yeah, they're pretty much not very many people. Not everybody does videos like that, and it was just
Okay.
basically a random sampling from the previous classes. That's pretty much it.
Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, you don't match those exactly, but they are there to help with ideas and things. All right, good question. Any other questions? All right, I'm so glad you guys got on today. I'm so happy that more than me showed up. It always makes it easier. And I thank you very much. And thank you, Ryan, for including those links. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Ryan also said, I guess a prestige item is expensive or delegates some kind of social status or authority. Yes, exactly. Exactly. When somebody gives you a gold watch after retiring for, with 30 years in the company, it is intended as a reciprocal prestige item, to pretend that they were grateful for your service. Or maybe it was sincere, who knows. But thank you very much for coming on today. I appreciate you guys showing up, and I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend. Again, any questions about your project, if you're uncertain at all, contact me and I'll walk through it and help you with your ideas. All right? We'll see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.